This thing's getting fixed. I'm gonna make a video on it, show you some of my earlier days of repairing iPhones. Anywho, from Jacob to Israel, chapter 3, book 1. I have not read this yet, so as always, bear with me. I will be trying to read and ingest while I'm narrating. We'll see how that goes. Chapter 3, Tuesday. I fell asleep under my bed, and I awoke to the beep of my alarm clock. Time for school again. I prepared for the day, slipping on my favorite pants, a pair of thick green corduroy cutoff shorts that were stringy at the ends and torn by the crotch. I rarely wore them because they were falling into shreds of fabric, and I wanted to preserve them, wear them for as long as I could. I wore the belt I made that had 2 rows of metal studs going all the way around it, and a Celtic dragon on the belt buckle. I slipped on my Susie and the Banshees t-shirt and my brown zip-up jacket. I thought I looked good that day. My bruise had gone down considerably, and I hid the worst part of it with my shaggy hair. I left my house without brushing my teeth. I forgot about it, and by the time I got halfway to the bus stop, I had already started thinking about what Emily would think of me. If she smelled my rancid morning breath. I would just ask Thubton for a mint. I heard dogs barking a ways off. I started running like I always did, but I didn't run as fast because I was afraid I was going to get sweaty. Something was different that day. The barks were closer than normal. I started to run faster, forgetting about my body odor. Suddenly a large black lab mutt jumped out of a thicket of dry bushes behind me. The dog raced forward to catch me, barking and slavering. Was this a daydream? It seemed awfully real for a daydream. I couldn't seem to manifest a samurai sword from my imagination to defend myself. No, this was real, very real. I darted off like a rabbit trying to escape the hunt. The dog gained on me. I got to the bus stop and kept running. He was right behind me the entire time. I couldn't keep running. I was nearly out of breath. I tripped over some debris in the middle of the unmaintained dirt road and fell, skinning my knee and dirtying my clothes. The dog leapt into the air and landed on top of me, putting his paws and the majority of his weight on my upper back, knocking the wind out of me. My face was planted in the dirt. I coughed and dust shot up into my nostrils with a sting. His paws dug into my shoulder blades. I screamed and cried out. Then the funniest thing happened. He started looking at the side of my face where the bruise Mr. Riley gave me was beginning to heal. The fear on my face faded, and I turned around. The dog sat down and wagged his tail, kicking up dust like a straw broom. His tongue was hanging from his mouth. He was just playing with me. What a relief. I thought I was dog food for sure. I patted his head and walked back to the bus stop. He followed me. I ignored him. He barked at me. I turned around and threw a stick into the forest and told him to go fetch. He just stood there, waving his tail and slavering. Go away, I yelled weakly. The dog refused my command, and when I continued back to the bus stop, he followed me. When I got there, I sat down on my backpack by the pine tree, and he sat next to me. I reached over and petted him until the rickety old bus pulled up and opened the door. The dog watched me get on. I looked back before the door closed and stared him straight in his dark brown eyes. I'm gonna call you Panic, because that's what I did when I first saw him. The door closed and I walked toward the back and sat in my usual seat beside Thubten. I opened up my hand for a mint, and when he gave it to me, I stuck it in my pocket. Where did you get that dog? And why are you all dressed up? I thought you were saving the green corduroys for special occasions now. Who are you trying to impress? He said with a smirk on his face. Is it that girl you had a crush on? The dog just chased me down, jumped on top of me, and got dirt all over my shirt. I don't know where he came from. I've never seen him before. I'm not all dressed up, and I'm not trying to impress anyone. Oh, come on, Jacob. It's that girl, isn't it? This is how I always dress. Tell me, Thubten said firmly, looking me dead in the eye, his face blank in an oddly solemn way. Disoriented by his seriousness, I replied, Emily. Who's that? Is that the girl you have a thing for? I don't know. What do you mean? Most of our conversations were free and fun, and rarely did we have to coax something out of the other unwillingly. But Thubten seemed to be honestly hungry for some answers, and I didn't really care to discuss my first crush too much. I mean, I know I shared everything with him, but this seemed very personal, like Emily and I were already lovers. Intimate lovers. But I felt I owed it to him to explain everything. So I told him about the passing glance in the hallway, the well of sympathy that I saw behind her eyes, the way her dreadlocks smelled like incense, and how her feet never seemed to lift off the ground. I smiled softly as I talked. Thubten listened carefully and nodded at the end of every sentence. After I was done with my rant, I asked him his opinion of Emily and of the situation in general. He said he didn't really have one because he didn't really know her well, and she was pretty quiet. He told me that he knew the girl I'd described and that they once had an art class together in junior high. He said that he had forgotten her name, but Emily wasn't it. I was glad he knew who I was talking about. It made the situation seem that much more real, less like another daydream. He turned away from me for half a second and looked out the window. The bus was passing by a small stream. Steam rose from it. I looked out the window with him and said, Indian summer. Listen, Jacob, I just don't want you to get too wrapped up in a girl that doesn't even know who you are. I mean, you're going to build her up in your head and make her into something that she isn't, and when you find the smallest little imperfection, it's going to destroy your world. Burst your bubble. Kill your daydream. You know? I just don't want you to get your feelings hurt. And that was why he had a white aura. He always took care of me. I gave him a soft pat on the back. We listened to a few songs, and before I knew it, we were at school again. The first classes came and went in the blink of an eye and the scratch of a pencil. It was already time to head to English class. It's odd how the entire day can seem like a beat of a heart, but those few seconds when you see her float around the corner can drag on like titillating torture. I watched her only for a few seconds and then averted my eyes, knowing that watching her too much was like staring straight into the sun. She was mine. I had enough still frames of her in my brain to last the rest of the day, playing paper dolls with her body. She wore a red wedding gown or a white dress on the beach with sand on her heels. I smirked and hugged my book bag close to my chest. Nothing could ruin this. In my mind, we lived a perfectly happy eternity with each other. I made no attempt to talk to her. In fact, I made sure to stand as far away as possible, while still keeping a good eye on her. I never even put the mint Thubten gave me in my mouth. I was so anxious I completely forgot. She entered her class and I entered mine. I noticed immediately that Thubton wasn't there. I asked some kids, and they said he had to go home sick. I hate to say it, but I was kind of glad. That meant I had the entire period to write about Billy and Emily. I didn't want Thubton to think I was being obsessive. This was my first crush. I wanted to go all out for it. It was the summer of oak trees strung thick with white toilet paper. It was the summer of change, growth, and broken hearts. It was the summer of charcoal girls and swimming nude in St. Lawrence Stream. It was the summer that ever since has haunted and graced my dreams. I was 16 then. My best friend Emily had just gotten her first car, a long, silver, pre-owned Lincoln with a torn-up interior. She had just put in a tape deck. We must have cruised down our little neighborhood street a million times and just let the tapes wear out. Stereo blazing and windows rolled down, our hands floating in the wind, diving up and down like dolphins swimming alongside a rusty battleship. There was always a sweetness in the air, like fresh plastic toys and newly cut grass. The smell of tire swings and cotton candy from the fair. I could still hear crickets when I would lie in bed at night. I was sitting in that cramped wooden desk in the corner of fourth period geometry class, counting the minutes left until the bell would ring and sound our freedom from Burkeville High. We only had 4 days left until summer. Everyone was getting antsy, and you could see they didn't care much for what the teacher was saying. The clock was our warden. The school was our prison. Our sentences were nearly served, and soon we would get off on good behavior. I tapped my fingers on the desk and looked over at Emily, who sat beside me. She caught my glance and rolled her eyes, letting me know that she was ready to get the hell out of geometry. She whispered something to me that I couldn't make out. I leaned in close and said, "What?" She said something else under her breath, her head still aimed at the front of the classroom. Our teacher, Miss Clark, an elderly woman who dressed like a communist and wore her hair in a tight bun, wrote on the blackboard to illustrate a point in her lecture. "What?" I asked again. She repeated her soft whisper again. I could tell by the way she exhaled that she was getting frustrated. I cupped my hand next to my ear and asked, "What?" a little louder. She rolled her eyes again, this time at me. I considered pretending to understand what she was saying. I imagine I looked rather confused. "Never mind," she said. This time the whole class could hear her. "Excuse me, Emily, do you wish to address the class? Should I stop my instructions so you can speak, or will you be quiet while I'm talking?" Miss Clark stomped her foot when she spoke. Each syllable seemed to march from her tongue like an army of ants marching off into combat. "I'll be quiet, Miss Clark," Emily replied softly. "Very well. No further talking, please." And the wrinkled old dictator went back to her teaching, victorious again. She had never lost a battle, not to my knowledge. Her chalk sung on the board like a harp being played by a demon, and the teeth of my classmates chattered in unison. But, like always, the bell silenced Miss Clark in her symphony of mathematics. Class dismissed. I can still remember the sound of that bell. It wakes me up from my worst nightmares. That bell is my savior. Only 3 more days now. I grabbed my tattered brown book sack and headed for the door with Emily at my side. I saw Miss Clark scratch at her snagged and torn pantyhose and wipe the dust from her left shoe onto the back of her right calf. She almost reminded me of a cricket for that one moment, her hair hanging down in her face, forming long, stringy gray antennas. Green dress shiny in the sun. She almost looked alien. I'm being taught by an alien. I thought lazily. Emily and I slipped out of the classroom unnoticed, free. As I struggled through the writer's block that always destroyed these Billy and Emily stories, I slowly became aware of my surroundings. Miss Bessett was standing on top of the air conditioner with a book of poetry hanging in her limp wrist. Her arms were crossed and she was glaring right at me. Everyone else in the class was as well. Well, if your poems are so much more interesting than Wordsworth, then by all means share them with us. She didn't like us ignoring her poetry, especially the transcendentalists. Thupton once laughed while she was reading an excerpt from Walden, and she sent him to the principal. I didn't know how to respond to this situation. I sat silent, blushed, and thought about Miss Clark. Well, it isn't a poem. Well, what is it? Probably a love letter to his zipperhead boyfriend, added a lanky redhead from across the room. His friend's laughter was cut short by Miss Bessett. Shut your mouth, Kenneth, and get your butt to the principal's office. I was just... Get! Kenneth, the red-haired boy, left the room murmuring curse words. Everyone was silent for a few seconds. Well, what is it? She asked again, less mad and now genuinely interested in my writing. I was still in shock from what Kenneth had just said. Boyfriend? Jacob. Oh, it's just a story, I think. I was very unsure of my efforts as a writer and too scared to let anyone into the landscapes I created with the written word. Let me hear it. I was hesitant. I carefully looked at the curious adolescent faces around me, just dying to eat my words and regurgitate them later to humiliate me. I shook my head no. Read it or go meet Kenneth in the principal's office. She jostled the book in her hand, growing impatient with me. She wasn't usually this hostile with me. Something must have been bothering her. I succumbed to her wishes and read my very short story to the class. Whenever I got to a part with what I believed to be a clever analogy or a pretty set of words, my classmates would laugh. Miss Bessett shushed them. When I got to the end, I was nearly in tears. I looked up and Miss Bessett had her hand over her mouth. I knew instantly that she was struck, either by my skill or lack thereof. She put Wordsworth back on the desk and walked over to me. Finish your story quietly, and after class I will edit it with you, she whispered. She gave me a wink and went back to her desk and continued reading aloud to the class. I smiled and looked at her for a brief second, but it was one of those seconds that seemed much longer. When class was over, I told her that I couldn't finish the story. She asked why, and I simply told her that I didn't know how people fell in love. She asked what I meant. I told her I had never seen real love before, and this story was supposed to be about Billy and Emily falling in love. I just wasn't sure how it worked. She opened up her desk drawer and pulled out a poem that somebody had written for her. I asked if it was a student, and she said it was an old flame. She studied the contours of my face as if she could see him there. You know, you're a lot like him in some ways. I whispered the title slowly to myself. The Slow Dance of the Snails. I began reading it, and she told me to keep it and read it later. It would help with my story. How will this help with my story? She just smiled. I folded it and put it in my front pocket. I left her room without saying goodbye. She thanked me on my way out. I didn't know for what. I just took her generosity and let my chest feel warm from her kindness while I walked to the bus. On the way home, I talked to Brandon about death metal, and Kathy drew little witches and skulls on Brandon's forearm. Their black auras melded into one overwhelming cloud when they sat that close together. I could tell that they were meant for each other, destined. She kissed his cheek before she got off at her stop. I had never seen such an open display of affection pass from her to Brandon before. He looked as if he was about to piss himself. He wouldn't stop yapping after that. I just listened. I was happy for him. I stroked the folded paper through my pants and thought about the many secrets this poem would unlock for me. Panic was waiting for me next to the tree by my bus stop. It looked like he had been loitering there all day. I smiled when I saw him. He barked. It was the first time I had ever come home to a happy face. The bus doors groaned shut behind me. It roared away, leaving a cloud of exhaust to mark his path. For a brief second, I pictured it as a large snail leaving behind a trail of slime. Panic barked again. I took off my book bag and unzipped it. Folder, book, letters, drawings, another folder, balls of assorted paper. Ah, a broken payday. I took it out of the wrapper and offered half of it to Panic from my palm. He sniffed at it hesitantly. I had to eat a pinch of it before he realized it was edible, and then he nearly took my hand off. He must have been starving, poor guy. He shook his head, snapping his jaw comically as he tried to chew the caramel. He cocked his head to the side and opened his mouth wide, trying to loosen the golden strands of sugar that made his teeth cling to one another. He made a weird canine grunt. After he was done with the candy, he smacked a few times and barked again. Still hungry? Woof. Follow me. We walked down the dirt road past the trailer parks. I didn't run from the barks we heard in the distance. I was safe now. I had one of their own on my side. We came to a dumpster at the end of a street, and I dug around in it for a while, looking for food. I found half a family-sized lasagna wrapped up in a white, hefty bag. I took it out and plopped the cold pasta on the grass beside Panic. He wagged his tail and stared up at me. Eat it, boy. He tore into it like a shark. If dogs could burp, he would have. The rest of the lasagna was gone in mere seconds. I picked up my stuff and we kept walking together. Panic had a lot more pep in his step. I made him a very happy dog, and it brought me peace to help him. When I got to my driveway, his pickup truck was there. I think Panic could smell my fear, and he let out a low, hot growl that scared me a little. I took my palm and rubbed the top of his snout. He paced back and forth in front of me and sniffed at the ground. I turned around and went back across the street to the magical meadow beside Pastor Casey's parsonage. Panic followed me. The sun looked like it was about 3 feet from the top of the tree line. We still had a few hours before the shadows got too long. I put my book bag down beside my sitting stump and sat down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out The Slow Dance of the Snails. I ran my fingers across its folded edges. The paper was old and browned by the natural oil from Miss Bessett's fingers tracing gently over it. You could tell it had been read many times. She must have loved this poem, or at least loved the person who wrote it for her. I opened it up carefully and read the whole thing aloud, slowly, like eating pieces of rich chocolate, trying to understand every facet of its flavor. The penmanship was a lot like my own, wild, clumsy, and artistic. The Slow Dance of the Snails. Have you ever seen the solemn crawl of the snails? Spineless creatures locked inside their spiraled houses, a cage from their world of salt-shaking nightmares. Coiled and clenched, a tight fist cowering inside of a sweaty pocket, afraid of the earth, afraid of the end. sliding their sweet lullabies to midnight moss bugs, looking in the grass for the one they feel inside, the peace they know they need. They hide all of their lonely lives for that one slow dance that seems to last forever. Their safety is such a bittersweet lonely, their slimy walk so slow. A trail leading to no one haunts them from behind. Have you ever seen the slow dance of the snails? The end of their lonesome travels? The meeting of that spirit, the one they felt inside. A polka-dotted puzzle piece. Wriggling out of their homes. Release, unfolding, freedom march. Completely open to the bird, perched, hungry on the log. They didn't seem to notice. They didn't seem to care. They explore each other's bodies, gifts of pink-spotted skin, lovemaking. The pair climb up to each other, two tiny towers joined together like micro-stitch work. Love so complete that neither light nor death can shine between their dancing souls. Such a primal passion, a liquid lust, a sweet devotion, a precious and tender devouring. So small, but so very perfect. Twirling, apprehensive, dotting antennas clapped together like young palms. They remind me of old lovers, familiar grasping, learning and holding. I wish we could melt and blend like this, like the delicate dance of the snails. Completely connected, without our cages, danger all around. A splendid kiss on delicious lips. A forever taste of their secret flavors. An orgasm untold by time or measure. I'm not sure if I completely understood what it meant, but I captured enough of its meaning to make me sit and think about love for a long time. I think I understand it now, being an old creature who has known love 1,000 different ways. It is only when you present your spirit without fear that you can enter into the kingdom and judge yourself clean, and exist as a fruit of the vine. Love is the creative force of God. As I refolded the creased paper, I realized that my only chance with Emily was to put myself out there, allow myself to be in the open and exposed. Maybe I should talk to her. Panic barked as if to agree. No dinosaurs were out that day. No smoky letters written in the sunset. Just a boy and his dog. The field was somehow different. It smelled thick with something heavy. Like if you could smell lead, or how Hiroshima smelled after the bomb. The cattails were stiff like nails, and not a leaf stirred. The sun fell in the sky, the death of Osiris. Branches thick with pine needles shielded its light from the field. The long, gaunt fingers of nature cast curled shadows that stalked closer to me as the moon crept into the sky. I didn't normally stay out this late, but with my guard dog, my faith in the harmlessness of nature was resurrected. The shadows slipped across the ground like serpents. The wind picked up, and the sound of leaves blowing hinted at the tender footsteps of spying goblins. The trees wheezed and slapped together, splintering claps that sent images of giants through my mind. I grabbed the fur on the back of Panic's neck. He stood up and readjusted himself so that he was sitting closer to me, and let his head rest across my lap. My eyes must have been wide. I heard something that sounded like laughter, the giggles of imps. Ghosts of unbaptized babies. Demons. Monsters that crawled across the grass of that black field. Jinn made of smokeless fire. Creatures with humpbacks slouched down the street that separated me from my house. The twigs that hung from the big peach tree in the front of the little church seemed to be 1,000 claws, skeletal hands, and its trunk, a crooked spinal column. That's it for now. Take care, people.